Picture in your head a utopia, a perfect civilization. You might have seen depictions of a utopia in films and sci-fis. What does it usually look like? What do we usually picture in our heads? Advanced technology, maybe. Perfect medical care. A clean environment, flawless education. If we could click our fingers and make a utopia, that's often what we would go for. But what is missing from a picture like that? It's something important, something critical to any society. It's the family, mums and dads and children. The family is often neglected when we think about what a good, ordered society looks like, what a restored humanity looks like. The world increasingly thinks that family isn't important. We don't need to think about how a family should work. It doesn't need to be ordered. It just is. The world so easily thinks like that. The world says it doesn't matter. But we all know the pain a broken family can cause. We know how lives can be ruined when a father is a tyrant in a home. We know how a hostile marriage causes those painful childhood memories. The world says family isn't important, but our pain says otherwise. The brokenness of this world says otherwise. Sin fractures this world. And one way sin does this is by fracturing the family, by taking God's design for the family and pulling it apart, disordering it. And as with all sin, it causes pain and chaos and broken lives. And what has Christ come to do? He's come to fix this broken world. He's come to reconcile and restore this broken and fractured world. And what is one way he's doing that? He's come to restore the family. We've seen over the past few weeks, God's big renovation project in the world is to take sinners, us, and transform us more and more into the image of Christ. We've died and been raised with Christ. We are God's big renovation project. He's making a new humanity, God's true utopia. And today we see that also means Christ is restoring the family. He's restoring it to its true design, the way God made family to be. Sin has disordered the family, fractured it, distorted the roles. Sin has put us against each other, and Christ has come to reorder it, to reconcile what was broken, to fix the pain of a broken family, and to bring it back to its glorious design. And this is the design. Colossians 3 is the picture of a restored family. And Paul addresses the four fundamental roles in that family: wives, husbands, children, and parents. The four building blocks of a family. And this is what a restored, redeemed family looks like. And so if you're married here today, this is what God has called our families to. This is the glorious design God is restoring us to. But if you're not married here today, but you're hoping to be, see this as something to aim for. Prepare for a family like this. Prepare to be a husband, a wife, a parent like this. This is all part of God's big renovation project, his work of art. And although the world neglects it, this is what this broken world really does need. And so let's see how Paul addresses these four roles. And he speaks to wives and husbands first. And look what he says. Wives, submit to your husband. Husbands, love your wives. And that's my first point today. Look at verses 18 and 19. Let's read both those verses. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, Love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Now, we've already got off to a controversial start. Verse 18 is not a verse that the world would read with a smile, is it? And because we live in this world, we may feel that as well. If Paul tweeted verse 18, there would be an uproar, wouldn't there? And there'd be an uproar partly because not everyone understands what the Bible means by submit. There's a knee-jerk reaction to think, oh, that means tyranny. And also, the world has become so used to the distorted roles of husbands and wives that when we face the true roles, it jars us. Our culture has been trying to destroy any distinction between men and women. And so this verse sounds like blasphemy to the world, doesn't it? Sin hates the light. But remember, this is God's word. And this is God's good design, his wise design for marriage. This is the way it was always meant to be. And so, what does Paul mean by submit? Wives, submit to your husband. What does that mean? Well, let me first define it, and then we can explore it. So submission means a willing response to a husband's sacrificial, loving leadership. Submission means a willing response to a husband's sacrificial, loving leadership. Marriage has a design. It's not just what we make of it. It's not random. No, marriage has a design. And each person, the husband and the wife, have different duties, different purposes and dynamics in that marriage. So like two pedals on a bicycle, they work together. They complement each other. And so to understand what submission means, we need to understand what a wife needs to submit to. We need to look at the role of the husband. The husband has the unique purpose to lead in his marriage. So look at verse 19. God's design for the husband is to love his wife. And love in a particular way. It's to love her by leading her and protecting her and providing for her. In Ephesians, Paul gives this wonderful picture of marriage. And he says, a husband and wife is to be like Christ and the church. What Christ is like to his church, a husband needs to be like that to his wife. And what does Christ do for his church? He leads and protects and provides for her. He's a loving head over his church. And that is what every husband is called to be to his wife. He's to lead her in life and in her faith, helping her grow in holiness, directing the family to wise and godly living. He's to protect her physically and spiritually, sacrificially going out of his way to make sure she's flourishing. He's to provide for her physical and spiritual needs, just like Christ. Husbands, this is our calling. This is our purpose in marriage. And this doesn't mean that the husband's more valuable. This doesn't mean that there's an inequality. No, a wife isn't inferior or less valuable. No, a husband is to love and lead her because she's incomparably precious. But there are different purposes. The husband is to be lovingly and sacrificially over his wife and leading her. And so when Paul says, wives, submit to your husbands, he's saying, wives, there is someone over you. Someone God has given to you and placed over you to love you and lead you and protect you and provide for you. And so be under that. Submit to that. This is the good design for both of you. So don't oppose that. Don't break that design. Don't try to flip it upside down. No, let him lead you. Willingly follow him. Submission means a willing response to a husband's sacrificial, loving leadership. Now, this does push back against all that our culture thinks about marriage and men and women. Our culture says there's no distinction, no different purposes or designs. In fact, men and women are basically interchangeable, they say. There's no fundamental difference. And marriage, at the heart of it, it's just a legal contract. It's like a business deal. But the true meaning and design of marriage is so much more. There is a beautiful design and purpose for women in marriage. It's to follow the leadership God has given you. He's given someone to protect you and love you, and you get to enjoy that. And this dynamic, this isn't a power grab. This isn't a husband wielding power over you. No, this is a husband there with love over you. God is wise, and this is his good design for you, for marriage, for all of us. And notice that this is a command. Submit. Action needs to be taken. It's voluntary submission. Submission is a posture. It's a stance that the wife needs to take in life. And it's a stance that we all take with Christ. It's a posture that says, I'll follow. I'm here to be led. Now lead me. Now, what will that submission look like practically? Well, think about how we are with Christ. It means listening to his spiritual advice. That might mean if your husband says, I really think we should start getting up earlier and going to Sunday schools on Sundays. And submission means really taking that on board and trying to make that happen and not just dismissing it. Submission means it's not about me getting my way in life, but asking, how can I help? How can we both serve God together in our own ways? Submission, it also means not belittling him. There's a real culture of seeing husbands as the incompetent morons that are basically the verbal punching bags. You see it in every advert out there. You see it in kids' cartoons. Peppa Pig, it's there. But submission means valuing your husband. It's a loving respect. Submission is the whole posture in life that says, I'm willing to follow you. Now lead. And that is God's good, restored design for marriage. Now, it needs to be said, submission does not mean letting your husband sin against you. This verse in no way allows for a husband to physically, verbally, or sexually abuse his wife. This is not a call to submit to sin, so please don't think that. If you're ever going through abuse, don't ever think you need to stay silent because that's what you think submission is. That's not submission. No, please don't stay silent. If you're going through anything like that, you can come to Paul or Reuben or any of the elders and you will be listened to. So please hear that this verse does not allow for abuse. In fact, Paul warns husbands about that, verse 19. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. With the wife entrusted to the husband, he now has a great and weighty task. He's to love her. He's to be like Christ and lead her. And so, husbands, your wife is there to be led, and she's waiting. So we all need to step up and lead. Not be lazy, not just sit back, but we need to step up and lead. And that will mean in the big things, like setting the spiritual temperature for the family, deciding that this is the church we're going to, that this is what we believe, that this is what we're teaching our children. It will mean working hard and providing for her in the office. It also means the little things. Love her by cleaning the living room. Care for her but by asking about her day, listening to her. Lead her but by freeing up her morning, her Saturday morning, by taking the kids out. And this doesn't mean what the husband says goes. No, leading means discussion. Seeing how she feels about things before decisions are made. That's love. That's good leadership. Be like Christ and sacrifice yourself for her. This is God's beautiful design, and it's a weighty responsibility we're called to. And so, can you see how horrible it is when a man abuses that position and is harsh with his wife? Harsh with his words, ruling the house with fear, being an angry tyrant, using his strength against her. That is a wicked perversion of this loving role. The man is placed over his wife to love her, never to crush her. Can you ever imagine Christ being like that with us? It's unthinkable, isn't it? No man should ever be like that with his wife. That belongs to the sin of this world. It belongs to the old life, but our life is now in Christ. And now he is restoring families and marriages. This is God's beautiful, restored design for marriage. Wives submitting to husbands, and husbands loving and leading wives for a godly family life. But there's one more aspect that Paul addresses. Christ is restoring the husband and wife relationship, and he's restoring the child-parent relationship. And here is God's design, my second point. Children, obey your parents. Parents, don't provoke your children. I just want to notice two things about verses 20 and 21. First, in verse 20, who is Paul speaking to? Who does he address? Children. So just think, as this letter is read out to the whole church in Colossae, he commands that in chapter 4. He says, read this letter out. As this letter is read out to the church in Colossae, who is there in the pews when they're reading this out? Children. Paul has written this whole letter to men, women, and children. Which means all that he said so far in this letter, all that he says in this letter, it all applies to children. And so what has Paul said to children in this letter so far? Children, you belong to Christ. Not just mum and dad belong to Christ, but you. Paul says in chapter 1, I thank God in my prayers for your faith, children. He says in chapter 2, Christ, by his blood, has reconciled you back to God. You have died and been raised with Christ. You, children, were buried with him in baptism. And now the Christian life is yours to live. Not when you turn 18, but now. And what does the Christian life mean for children? Well, this is the second thing to notice. It means obeying parents. Children are not just equal flatmates living in the same house as us. No, our children are under our authority. They're under our care, and they are called to obey us. And we shouldn't have an aversion to that word obey. This is God's good design. Obedience is good. And it means, as parents, we can't abuse that authority. Verse 21, fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. This can apply to mothers too, of course, but Paul sees that there's a particular temptation for fathers. We mustn't frustrate our children by harshly wielding against them their duty to obey. Just angrily commanding things to our children. We're not to be tyrants over our wives, and we're not to be tyrants over our children. With their obedience comes our duty to explain things, to understand them, understand their temperaments, understand the things that they're going through in life. Otherwise, Paul says, they'll become discouraged. They'll think these commands and God's design, they'll think it's all bad. And so it's a weighty thing. Our actions will affect our children's view of God. And so let's encourage them. Let's show them that obedience is a beautiful thing. It's good for them. That this is God's beautiful, restored design for the family. And it really is. Christ is taking the broken, painful fragments of what this world thinks family is, and he's restoring it. Restoring it to something beautiful, to the way it was always meant to be. In his grace, God is restoring this world, and he's restoring the family. Let me pray.